Hello everyone, this is Direwolf20 and welcome to my IndustrialCraft 2 for version 1.3.2 Spotlight. Time to check out IndustrialCraft version 1.106. A bunch of cool changes here. The biggest, of course, is nuclear reactors, and I'm still trying to get the hang of them myself, so apologies in advance. I'm going to do my best to explain them. Hopefully I don't get them too wrong, and then we'll move on and check out some other stuff. So I think we're going to cover some of the other additions first, and then we'll cover nuclear reactors, because it's pretty much they've completely changed. It's an entirely new system. So I'll be back in just a moment to show you guys all about the new stuff in IndustrialCraft 2. Alright guys, as I explained, a majority of this update is about nuclear reactors, but first I'm going to just show you a couple cool things to note. First off, personal safes got a pretty cool new texture. Look at that. Sweet. And when you open it opens it up, forwards like that. So that's kind of cool. I like it. And as you guys should know, you need to use a wrench to break the thing. You won't be able to break it with a drill or anything like that. Second off, we've got a new set of items here. The rubber boots you're familiar with, but we also have a scuba helmet. This thing's pretty neat. The scuba helmet allows you to go jumping in the water. It's kind of like a poor man's quantum helmet. We can go ahead and just jump underground here and see what happens. Cool. Now the recipe for the scuba helmet is an orange dye, some glass, and some iron bars, and some rubber. Neat. Sounds pretty cool. Let's see what happens as my air bubbles start to deplete. You can see it quickly filled it back up. Awesome. I like the looks of that. So a little bit of a cheaper way to survive going underwater. Now to be able to live underwater, you're going to need some compressed air cells. You can see I've only got 62 on me at the moment, and I suddenly got 61. And I'm starting to convert those compressed air cells into empty cells. They're very easy to make, don't worry. You just have to take an empty cell and place it in a compressor. So you don't have to have any items aside from an existing empty cell. Throw it in a compressor, and you'll have some compressed air cells. Now if you don't have any compressed air cells on your character, and you start to have some air breathing problems, that's not going to be good. All of a sudden, we're not breathing underwater anymore. Bad news. So if we pick them back up, you can see that the scuba helmet now refills my breath, and it's going to use those compressed air cells. Pretty cool. And the remaining components of the hazmat suit are the body armor here, hazmat body armor, dun dun dun, and hazmat suit leggings. So just some orange dye and some rubber, not a big deal. And oh man, look how cool my guy looks. How's it going, Steve? Like your new outfit? Oh yeah, I do, Direwolf. Oh yeah. So the hazmat suit will protect you from some hazardous materials, specifically nuclear reactors. Now, I'm not positive just yet, but I think you will start to take some damage if you try and get too close to a running nuclear reactor, especially if it's getting too hot. So the hazmat suit will help protect you from that. It's definitely a good thing to wear. You can also use it for, all kinds of other cool stuff, which we'll get into in the future. Pretty much, it's just awesome looking. And finally, I'll note that nuclear explosions also are poisonous now, and the hazmat suit will help protect you from that. So just keep that in mind. So now, let's start looking at the nuclear reactor changes, because this is going to get complicated. Alright guys, the first thing I want to point out to you is this little tool in my hand right here. This debug item does not have a recipe. You have to get it out of creative mode or NEI. But what it will allow you to do is it basically works as a built-in thermometer. Now if you guys have played IndustrialCraft for a while, you'll note that this has been in the game for quite a while. I've just never really shown it in any of my Spotlight videos. But right-click on a reactor, and it's going to show you, whether it's active at the moment, the current heat, the maximum heat, the HEM, and the output. So let's check this stuff out now. The next thing I want to show you guys is that the nuclear reactor system has been completely revamped. I mean, like, totally different from what it was before. If I open up NEI here, we can go ahead and check out some cool stuff. First off, let's go through and find the items. We've got some condensators, some copper plating, we've got neutron reflectors, heating cells, advanced heat vents, component heat vents, overclocked heat vents. These are basically your heat vents. You've got heat exchangers. You've got reactor plating, more of it. So heat capacity reactor plating, containment reactor plating, dense copper plates, all kinds of stuff. We've also got coolant cells and multiple sets of uranium cells. You get quad and dual uranium cells to go along with the original stuff. We've also got, if we flip through to the original area where the uraniums and stuff was, we've got our near depleted uranium and re-enriched and depleted. These guys got some really cool looking new textures, as well as a heat exchanger, reactor plating, and the base coolant cell and uranium cell. And as always, your original uranium cell is simply a combination of refined uranium and an empty cell. Or, of course, if you could figure out the old way of re-enriching your uranium cells, you take a re-enriched uranium cell and some coal dust. But this is the typical way of creating a uranium cell. Okay, now you can go ahead and use your uranium cell with a dense copper plate, put two of them together to get a dual uranium cell, and then two dual uranium cells with three dense copper plates will get you a quad uranium cell. Dense copper plates are 8 copper in a compressor. Cool. Now, the other thing that you should note, and this is very important, is now reactor redstone signaling has been reversed. In the past, a redstone signal would turn off a reactor. Now, a redstone signal turns it on. So make sure to have your redstone in the proper configuration. Right now, it's turned off, so the reactor will not run. Note that if I place a uranium cell in here, we're going to see that it's not currently running. Active equals false. Now, we're going to start looking at uranium cells and how they interact with each other. You might remember from previous versions of IndustrialCraft that if you put multiple uranium cells next to each other, they kind of both increase their output as a result of being next to each other. So for example, this uranium cell will only output the base amount of energy. In the past, that was 10 EU per tick. Now, as a result of these nuclear reactor changes, and as crazy as these guys can get now, that's actually been halved. So now your base nuclear output is 5 EU per tick to compensate for how much more crazy these things can get. So just keep in mind that, you're going to be able to get more out of these nuclear reactors now, but just for balance purposes, they have been reduced a little bit on their individual lines. So let's go ahead and hook up our redstone signal to this guy. And we'll note that we're starting to generate EU. We're outputting 5 EU per tick, and we're building up some reactor heat. Note that the heat is currently at 36, the max is 10,000, and the output is 5 EU per tick. Let's turn this guy off. Now let's see if it starts to cool down like we're used to. No, apparently it is not. That's because nuclear reactors no longer cool down from air or water around them. So you don't have to surround them with water anymore, which I personally think is kind of cool because that was always annoying to me. I didn't like the whole water surrounding thing. That was just my personal preference though. So there is no automatic cooling as a result of these nuclear reactors. So we're going to have to figure out how to cool them off. But let's not worry about that for just a moment. We're going to go ahead and throw another uranium cell in there. Now what's going to happen is these two uranium cells are going to work together and they're going to feed off of each other. So this guy is going to produce 5 EU per tick, and so is this guy, but we're going to get double from each of these as a result of them being sitting next to each other. So let's keep them separate for a moment, so now they're not touching each other, and we'll see what we get. We should get 5 from this one and 5 from this one. Let's turn it on, and you'll see we're getting a total output of 10. Cool. Turn it off. Now, if we place them next to each other, we're going to double the efficiency of both of these uranium cells. So this one will start outputting 10, and this one will output 10 for a total of 20. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, look at that. Exactly like we would have expected. Cool. Now, if you place another uranium cell here, this one will output 10, this one will output 10, and this guy should output 15 for a total of 35. Okay, let's see what happens. There we go, 35. Now we're of course producing a lot more heat by doing that. So basically, whenever a uranium cell is touching another uranium cell, it's going to increase its output. And so if it's touching 2, it'll output to 15. Touching 3, this guy will start outputting up to 20. And if it were to touch 4, this guy would output up to 25. Awesome. So what do you think dual uranium cells will do? Well, let's turn on this reactor and see what it outputs. A dual uranium cell outputs 20, exactly like you would have expected. So it's just like you had placed 2 uranium cells next to each other, like we did here, except it's only taking up 1 block. Pretty awesome. Very awesome, actually. Now, how much will a quad uranium cell do? Let's check it out. A quad uranium cell, if we flip this lever on, it's starting to produce energy and heat, so be careful. We're producing 60 EU per tick from a single quad energy cell. Pretty crazy. Now, the reason for that is it's as if you had placed 4 uranium cells in the machine like this. And this guy is producing 5 by itself, but it's touching 2 others, this one and this one. So it's producing 15, 15, 15, and 15. 15 times 4 is 60. So that's where you get your 60 from a quad uranium cell. pretty awesome. Alright, so we've seen how to produce heat. What can we do about it? Well, one of the things we can do about it is work with coolant cells. A 10K coolant cell is produced with some tin and a water cell, or a water bucket. So basically, it's some tin surrounding a water cell. Not too bad. Now you can go ahead and use this with three of them and some more tin to get yourself a 30K coolant cell. And then finally you can upgrade to a 60K coolant cell by combining two 30Ks and one of those dense copper plates that we saw earlier. These guys can all hold up to either 10K, 30K, or 60K heat. They don't dissipate their heat, they just hold it. That's a very important note. So let's go ahead and put a quad uranium cell in here. Now, these guys will only be able to hold heat if they're sitting next to the quad uranium cell. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our debug tool back, and we'll go ahead and check this out. Just for note, I've reduced the internal heat to 0. I've kind of reset this reactor just so you guys can see. Now, I've got these separated by a blank space, so the 10K coolant cell shouldn't work with the quad uranium cell. Let's go ahead and activate this guy, and we should see that we're building up heat, and that the coolant cell is not taking any damage. That's a problem. So let's go ahead and turn it off, and let's put the coolant cell next to the quad uranium cell. Okay, turn it on, and let's see what's going on with the internal heat. Note that it's not going up anymore. Instead, the 10K coolant cell is collecting all the heat that's being output by the uranium cell that's next to it, that it's touching. So your coolant cell will start absorbing heat. This guy can only absorb 10K heat. Note that the reactor heat level is still at a static number of 768. Its maximum heat is 10,000, and if a reactor gets up to that 10,000 range, it's very much in danger of exploding, and that would be bad. Okay, now let's turn off the reactor. Now I told you guys that these coolant cells can only absorb and store heat. They do not dissipate it, which means that this heat level will not go down under any circumstances. It's just going to sit there and absorb the heat. Eventually it will get destroyed. So you're going to have to replace them, but don't worry, there is a way to dissipate heat. I just haven't gotten there yet. But for now, just note that the coolant cells will not cool themselves off. They just absorb and store the heat that was output by the uranium cells. Next, I want to talk to you guys about the three types of reactor plating. There is the basic reactor plating, the containment reactor plating, and the heat capacity reactor plating. Now, these guys do a couple different things. Your basic reactor plating grants you an extra 1,000 to the max heat of the reactor. So if we go ahead and place this guy in here and hit our debug tool, you'll see our max heat is now 11,000 instead of 10,000. Okay, so that's what the reactor plating does. It also reduces your explosion potential, which is what that HEM indication is down there. So your reactor won't explode as big if you've got one of these guys in there. Now if we take this out and go ahead and right click on this, you'll see we're back down to a max heat of 10,000 and a HEM of 1.0. Okay, now your other option here is containment reactor plating. This guy only increases your max heat by 500, but note that the explosion potential of your reactor is lower. It's 0.9 instead of 0.95, meaning this thing will explode even smaller in a radius, but it won't be able to absorb as much heat. So this guy is better explosion resistance, but less heat absorption than this guy. What do you think the heat capacity reactor does? Well, it does the exact opposite. Better heat, but less explosion resistance. We're at 0.99, which means it's almost exactly the same as 1.0, but it can store 2,000 more max heat. So it's your choice which of these three you want to use. And do note that I've got this guy running at the moment, and he's producing heat. He can resist more. This reactor plating and the other reactor platings do not take damage by being adjacent to a quad uranium cell, or any other uranium cells for that matter. So don't worry about placing them in there. They won't take damage. I guess the only way you can lose them is if the thing explodes. And just for the sake of showing it, the reactor plating is advanced alloys with dense copper plates. Your containment reactor plating is 2 advanced alloys with reactor plating. And your heat capacity is 2 dense copper plates with your reactor plating. Cool. Alright, now it's time to talk about heat exchangers. Now you can see that the reactor currently has a hull heat of 864, and I've got it empty at the moment. I want to show you the heat exchanger is a dense copper plate with an electronic circuit and some more tin. This is your basic heat exchanger. There's some advanced ones I'll get to in a moment. What this guy does is it has the ability to balance the heat between different components in a reactor and within the reactor itself. So let's take a look at our coolant cells, okay? I'm going to get myself a few more of these. All right, some more 10K coolant cells. Awesome. Now, I'm going to place a 10K coolant cell in the reactor all by itself, and you'll note that it's not going to absorb heat directly from the hull, because the only way a coolant cell can absorb heat is if it's sitting next to a uranium cell, or if it's sitting next to a heat exchanger, which will exchange heat between the coolant cell and the exchanger, the core of the reactor here. So note that this guy has a pretty neat little ability. It's at currently 864 heat. So let's place our heat exchanger next to the 10K coolant cell. Note now that the reactor itself is starting to cool down, and it's dumping the heat into the coolant cell. This is happening at a rate of 4 heat per tick, I want to say. Or is it 4 heat per reactor tick? Yeah, it's 4 heat per second. Okay, so note there that it's going down by 4 heat per second. Okay, so let's take this guy out. Cool. So the core ability of this heat exchanger, the amount it can exchange with the reactor itself, is 4 per second. Note it's no longer going down because I took it out. Now the other thing it can do is it can balance out the heat between a coolant cell and another coolant cell by sitting in between them. Let's see what happens now. Cool. So this guy is starting to balance out with this guy here, I think. Let's give it a minute and see what happens. So now if you're looking closely, I placed some more coolant cells next to it. This one is kind of repaired a little bit of itself. You can see the number starting to go down. I guess that's the internal heat level behind the scenes. Okay, and all the other ones adjacent to it are going up. Now if we give this guy a little bit of time to balance out, you'll note that the reactor heat is no longer going down. Okay, and the heat levels here are going up. This one's going up. This one's stabilized at 767-ish. And now our heat exchanger is starting to take a little bit of damage itself. Cool. Let's give this time a little bit more time to balance. Now if you pay attention to the number dropping here, you'll see it's dropping or changing by 12 each time it is changing. That's because the heat exchangers have two components. Number one, how quickly it can interact with the hull, which was 4, and how quickly it can interact with objects next to it, which is 12. So this heat exchanger has a core component of 4 and a side transfer rate of 12. Note that we've kind of gotten to a bit of a balance point here. This thing is now balanced out the heat exchanger itself, the components next to it, and the reactor hull. Note that the reactor hull really isn't changing too much. It's kind of staying about the same, and it's trying to keep all these components around the same number. So that's what the heat exchanger does, is it basically balances the heat between all the components around it and the hull, and itself for that matter. And this standard heat exchanger can only store about 2,500 heat. Now, for the purposes of showing you the reactor heat exchanger, I'm going to go ahead and give this 10K coolant cell a good amount of heat, and I'm also going to let the reactor heat build up a bit. I'll be right back. Alright, we've gotten our reactor up to a decent heat level. It's at 1452. Note that the green light is still on. That's only indicating that the reactor's gotten pretty hot. Even though it's not running, it is hot. Okay, and we've also damaged our coolant cell a little bit. So I'm going to show you guys the reactor heat exchanger. What this guy does is he focuses on the reactor as opposed to the components next to it. This guy actually has a 0 rate of transfer the components next to it, meaning it can't balance out components between the coolant cell it's sitting next to and the coolant cell in the reactor. So let's put a 30K in there, and we'll put our reactor heat exchanger in. Okay, you'll quickly note that it's going to start taking some damage itself, and the 30K coolant cell is not doing anything. Okay, it's also going to dump a bunch of the heat directly into here, and it'll quickly balance it out. So very quickly does this thing cool off. So basically your reactor heat exchanger can transfer rate with the reactor a lot faster than it can transfer with the products next to it. It can't affect the products next to it at all. But if you do want to focus on the products next to it and not the reactor, then you're going to want a component heat exchanger. Okay, so what this guy does, it has a side transfer heat but no core transfer heat, which means that we can drop this guy down, and it's going to balance out the 10K coolant cell with the 30K coolant cell to the point where they're going to just hang out and be friends. But it's not going to affect the reactor heating at all. And you'll see this even better when I place some more 10K coolant cells in here. Note that the reactor heating is not going down at all. Okay. But if I were to place the reactor heat exchanger in there, it'll start bringing down the reactor heating a bit faster. Maybe if I throw a fresh guy in there. Oh, I guess it's balanced enough. And finally, the last kind is the advanced heat exchanger. This guy does require a good amount of resources, pretty expensive to make. It uses some diamonds in the process, but it's going to be able to basically be a bit more effective. It's pretty much the same thing as your standard heat exchanger in that it can do both core and side, so it can mess with components and it can mess with the reactor hull, but it just does it more effectively. It has a pretty much a built-in amount of 24 for side transfer as opposed to the 12 in the standard, and 8 for reactor transfer instead of the 4 in the standard. So it's pretty much twice as effective as the basic heat exchanger. Alright, Direwolf, you've showed us how to store heat, you showed us how to produce heat, you showed us how to transfer heat between components, but we've yet to see how to get rid of heat. Well, that's why we've got vents. Let's take a look at these bad boys right now. We've got a bunch of vents here: advanced heat, component heat, overclocked, reactor, and heat vent. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through these guys right now. Alright, the first one to take a look at is the heating vent. Let's go ahead and check our heat is currently 968 and throw the heating vent inside the reactor anywhere we want. Note that the reactor heat is not going down. Your basic heating vent cannot cool directly from the reactor, but what it can do is absorb it can absorb heat from a nearby thing like a uranium cell or a heat exchanger. So let's put a component heat exchanger next to it and note that it's starting to cool off the reactor a little bit and take in a little damage in itself. Now if we take our component heat exchanger off there, note that it cooled off. Cool. Very good. Let's throw a quad uranium cell in and just turn it on for a second and note that it's starting to take some heat damage. Okay. Now when we turn off the reactor, the heat vent will start to cool itself off. Your basic heat vent can cool itself at a rate of 6 heat per second. So note that it's going down. Cool. So pretty much your heat vent can only cool itself, and the only way it can get heat is from being adjacent to a uranium cell or adjacent to a heat exchanger, okay? But the reactor itself is remaining at 968 heat. Good to note. So let's get this heat vent out of here and show you guys the next type of heat vent, which is the reactor heat vent. This guy kind of balances itself. Let's take a look at the heat vent recipe first. You can see it's just some refined iron and iron bars, but your reactor heat vent takes a heat vent with some copper plating. This guy will start to absorb heat from the reactor and cool it off at a rate of 5 heat per second. So note here, we're going down by 5. Cool. It's taking in 5 heat from the reactor and venting it at the same time, 5 per tick. So basically a reactor heat vent cools off the reactor by 5 heat per second. Good. Awesome. Cool. When we take it out of there, it's no longer running. Now your component heat vent, as you might guess, doesn't cool off the reactor itself. Note that it's no longer cooling at all. But what it will do is cool off some components adjacent to it. So if I throw some coolant cells in there, you can see this coolant cell is starting to cool off. Pretty neat. And you'll note that it's cooling by about 4 per tick. Good deal. 4 per second, that is. Reactor ticks are 1 second each. So there you go. 4 heat per second dissipating from the adjacent coolant cells. Good deal. So this guy should cool down as well. There you go. Pretty neat. Now, of course, if you use a reactor heat exchanger, you can see that we're going to cool off the reactor heat exchanger, but we're also absorbing some heat from the hull. So you can combine a heat exchanger with a component heat vent to cool off your reactor if you don't want to use the reactor heat vent. Now, the next one I'm going to show you is called the overclocked heat vent. You take one of those reactor heat vents, add some gold to it. This guy absorbs heat from the reactor faster than it can release it. It absorbs heat at 36 per second, but it can only cool at 20 per second. So by throwing in an overclocked heat vent, it's going to quickly cool off your reactor hull. Okay, note it's going down by 36. Okay, but note it's also absorbing damage, and it can only store about 1,000 damage before it gets destroyed. So you have to be a little bit careful when you're messing with your overclocked heat vents. They can cool very quickly, but if you don't use them properly, they will get destroyed very fast. Okay, good to note. Now, once your reactor heat is down to 0, the overclocked heat vent will start to release its built-up heat. So basically, it sucks too much heat out of the reactor too fast, but it is very quick at dissipating it. Awesome. And finally, we've got our advanced heat vent. These guys have a self-cooling of 12, which is a lot better. It's pretty much double what the core heat vent was, but just like the core heat vent, it has 0 reactor transfer, which means that it does not absorb from the reactor. It just cools a little bit faster. It's basically the upgraded version of the heat vent. Doesn't switch from the reactor or from components nearby, but if you do have it sitting next to a uranium cell or a heat exchanger, it'll cool itself off very quickly. Now here's a neat addition called the Neutron reflector. This guy pretty much acts like a uranium cell next to another uranium cell, and that will increase its efficiency, but it won't produce its own heat or energy. So let's go back to the old example of one uranium cell and turn this guy on. We can check that it's producing 5 EU per tick. Okay. Now, if we were to throw a neutron reflector in there, it's now producing 10 EU per tick. So we've doubled the output of the uranium cell. Without putting another uranium cell next to it, we only put a neutron reflector next to it. Now, this guy can only last for 10,000 seconds in a nuclear reactor, which those who are fans of nuclear reactors know that's exactly 1 cycle. So you're going to have to craft new neutron reflectors each time you want to run a new cycle. You've of course, can place 2 uranium cells next to a neutron reflector. Now we're producing 20, in that both of these guys are producing 10 per tick, but this guy is going to get damaged twice as fast and only last for half a cycle. For that purpose, you might want to go ahead and get yourself a thick neutron reflector, which is 4 neutron reflectors surrounded by one of those dense copper plates, and if you could guess, it's going to last 4 times as long. So you can run this for 4 cycles, or 2 cycles with 2 uranium cells, or 1 cycle if you put 4 uranium cells all around it. Very cool. Now finally, I'm going to show you guys condensators. What these guys, they're kind of neat little tools. They're basically refillable or recraftable coolant cells. If you check it out, you can take a heat vent with a heat exchanger and center around it with redstone to get your redstone condensator. And you have to get a lapis lazuli block with a couple of these redstone condensators to get a lapis condensator. But these guys are neat. What they can do is they can pretty much accept any amount of heat from surrounding components, but they don't balance heat around themselves, and they'll instantly disperse the heat by using their fuel. So let's go ahead and throw a quad uranium cell in here with a redstone condenser, okay? And you'll note that it starts to take damage. So it's going to absorb the heat from the adjacent block. Pretty cool. Let's get a few more redstone or quad components in there, and just let it start creating its own heat. Oh boy. So you can see at this point we're producing 240 EU per tick. We don't have any heat in the reactor yet, but this little condensator here is building up. Now it can store 20K heat, so it can store about 20,000 heat before it'll be depleted. Let's see what happens at that point. All right, looks like we're getting there to the heat level. It's building up, and it's maxed. Okay, now any extra heat will go into the reactor hull, which you can see it doing now very quickly, as a matter of fact, until I turned off the reactor. All right, so now this thing is depleted. It can no longer absorb heat from its adjacent blocks. All right, now in order for us to refill this thing, you can see that we can just combine it with some redstone. Cool. Let's take a piece of redstone here and combine it, and you'll see we'll get a half full condensator. Awesome. Now if we combine these guys, we'll get a full condensator. Very awesome. So this guy has now been refilled by using a couple pieces of redstone. Your lapis one can absorb 100,000 heat from adjacent blocks. Remember, it's not going to go into the it's not going to go ahead and pull from the reactor hull by itself, unless of course you were to use a component heat exchanger or something like that. So just keep that in mind. Very cool. Probably do something like this to go ahead and the reactor heat exchanger is going to pull from the reactor. The component is going to balance these two components and go ahead and start storing it in this guy. It can store, like I said, 100,000 heat. Now the final thing I'll show you relates to breeding. Breeding hasn't changed all that much. You can still get depleted uranium, and there is one important change. The reactor heat doesn't add a 2x bonus, but merely a +1 bonus for reactor heat. So it'll need need about 10,000 ticks on a heat level of 0 to 3,000, 5,000 ticks, which is half a cycle, for a heat level of 3,000 to 8,000, and about a third of a cycle between 6,000 and 9,000. But you can use, with your plating, you can get your reactors well past the 30K heat level, which means you can really build it up and get it super hot to the point where it really starts to build up. If you want to help get it hot, you can use heat packs. These are heating cells, which are crafted with lava cells, electronic circuits, and dense copper plating, and you can see that they stack with each other. Now, if you go ahead and throw them in there, they don't seem to heat up the reactor hull itself, so you can see nothing's happening with the heat level. But if you place it next to a component, it's going to start applying a heat level to that component, so you can see this coolant cell start to build up. Now, because they stack, you can throw them inside this reactor all at once, and the more you have in there, the quicker it'll transfer heat to the adjacent components. It'll transfer, from what I can tell, about 1 per tick per item in the stack. So if you've only got 1 there, it transfers 1 heat per tick, and 64 in a stack transfers 64 heat per tick. And it'll keep it up to a maximum of the heated component next to it of the stack size times 1,000. So if I go ahead and just have 1 stack next to it, note that it's no longer applying heat to it anymore. But if I put a second one there, it should keep applying heat until it gets to about the 2,000 mark, and then it'll stop. So let's go ahead and see if that's accurate. So because we've got 2 in the stack there, it won't go any further than 2,000 on that 10K coolant cell. But again, if we put a third one in there, it would bring that 10K coolant cell up to 3,000 heat. Neat. Alright guys, I think that pretty much wraps up all the changes with IndustrialCraft 2. Most of them, like I said, were focused around the nuclear reactor. It's pretty awesome the amount of changes that they made to this thing, and I think it's really going to help for some more varied and interesting designs. In the past, it was like pretty much it got down to the point where there were 1 or 2 designs that almost everyone used. Now, you have a lot more options and a lot more possibilities. You can get these things to output some serious amount of EU, as well as some crazy amounts of heat and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of combinations you can mess with. So this is Direwolf20 signing off on the IndustrialCraft 2 Spotlight. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and take it easy.